Good morning, Crossroads. There we go. How's everybody doing today? Y'all good? Everybody's good? Awesome. So I'm excited before I get started because we're continuing in our sermon series, Greater Than. But before I get started with that, I want to give a shout out to our Men's Connect group. Our Men's Connect group came out yesterday and they helped us get some things done at the church. There was a lot of things that we needed to get done, just little odds and ends, baseboard stuff coming up, or ceiling tiles needed to be replaced. And we even, replaced 2 toilets that wasn't working. I'm talking about we were working, y'all. And we couldn't do it without those fellas coming in and helping us out. So I just want to tell them thank you. They worked hard, so I believe that they are home resting because we were up here way longer than we had scheduled. But I want to tell them thank you for those that, our Connect group leader actually put that together. And so I tried to forward it to some men, but I'm sure I missed some men. So my apologies. Next time, I'll make sure that doesn't happen. We're going to try and figure out how can we let everybody know and make it even a church-wide event to come and just help take care of the building that's ours. It's not mine. It's God's house, but it's our job to steward it. And so we want to be able to steward it well. And so that's part of our responsibility as a family. And so I'm excited about that. With that said, we're going to get down into this next message in this Greater Than series. You guys ready? Y'all ready? You sure? All right, just making sure. All right. So where I want to start today, I don't know about you guys, but here in Fort Worth, they have this term, and it's different from where I'm from, but I'll use it just so that everybody may understand or it may help. When 2 people, like back in high school going at it, it was called high-siding. Yes, I get it. If you're not from here, I'm like, what is high-siding? Where I came from, it was called like cracking. You were cracking jokes. Essentially, you're talking about each other. Y'all haven't had that time in high school to where maybe you were together and somebody shoot out a joke, yo mama so, and don't get offended. I'm not talking about anybody's mom, but y'all know how it all started. And then there was that one person, that one guy, girl that was just really good. And like they would just drop that one joke to where the whole cafeteria would just be like, oh. I don't know if y'all ever had that moment. But what happens is the joke was so good, it was like, now what? Like, that was it. Like, they dropped a bomb. You couldn't beat that joke. And so when I grew up, you had to learn how to defend yourself that way. Like, you had to have something in your arsenal. You try and watch comedians, whatever you could do to have something in your pocket so you could defend yourself. See, a lot of times, though, life hits us way harder than jokes. Like, the way life hits you is in your pocket with the bills. Sometimes unexpected bills. We just had a microwave that just went on us. Where are we? Buying a new microwave. They did get successfully installed, by the way. I like to toot my own horn there. But no, life hits us hard. And in those moments, sometimes I want you guys to realize whether it's a bill, whether it's people, whether it's whatever it may be, your health, grace has a comeback for that. It's a comeback that is so good. Remember last week we said grace is the finished work that's not done. That's grace's comeback. Grace says, you know what, I got this. It looks at life and say, now what? And so that's what we're going to look at, because grace is the defense that we need in life. And so the title of today's message is Now What? And the approach that we're going to take is a little different. It's going to feel Easter-esque or Resurrection Sunday-esque, because I feel like one of the best ways to talk about grace is by looking at what Jesus did on the cross. Now, you can't fully understand grace without talking about what Jesus did on the cross. And so as I go in there and we're going to talk about it, I want to start at this point or this place. Have you ever been to Chick-fil-A and they forgot to say my pleasure? Now, they set this up. This is a part of their training and their customer satisfaction and customer experience. And so if they forget to say it, I'm not going to lie, I've been offended. I felt like I deserved a my pleasure. I didn't tell them to set that up in their training and all their customer management and all that stuff. No, they did it. And so when they don't do it, I'm offended. Just downright offended. Or if we're talking about offense, I don't know about you. If you're a parent in here and you have more than one child, this is the perspective I'm coming from. I'm guilty of getting upset at the wrong child. I've done this before. Something happens, and in your mind as a parent, you automatically assume it was that child. Like you just know. It just has their signature all over it. Then one of the siblings, I don't know what comes up in them. Maybe the lecture is that strong. They're like, wait, no, it wasn't them. And so now, my child that I've just lectured back and forth, they have a right to be offended. For them, they can be offended. But here's the deal. Regardless of whether you think you have the right to be offended, this brings me to point number one. Grace is greater than the offense. Grace is greater than the offense. Let's go to Luke chapter 23 and 32. This is where we're going to jump in to this moment. So Jesus has been accused. He's been talked about. He's been sent to Pilate, and they've determined that they want Jesus to be crucified. And this is where we're going to start out in verse 32 in Luke chapter 23. It says this: 2 others, both criminals, were led out to be executed with him. When they came to a place called the Skull, they nailed him to the cross, and the criminals were also crucified, one on his right and one on his left. Jesus said, "Father, forgive them, for they don't know what they are doing." So here we have Jesus in this moment. He's been wrongfully betrayed, wrongfully accused, wrongfully captured, beaten, and mocked. So if anybody had a reason to be offended, was the spotless, blameless Lamb, Jesus. But in that same moment, in the middle of everything that he could have been feeling in that moment, grace never wavered. See, no matter what you may think, or no matter how you may feel, your response of grace has to be greater than the offense. And I know some of you are like, well, they hurt me. Jesus is like, me too. Now what? How are you going to respond? But no, God, you don't get it. Like they lied on me bad to where I don't know how long it's going to take for me to rebuild my reputation. And Jesus was like, yeah, me too. Now what? How are you going to respond? But no, you don't understand. You don't understand. They treated me unfairly. This wasn't even something that I deserved. Jesus was like, yeah, me too. Now what? See, I'm thankful to God that we don't have to die for all mankind. That was the level of grace that God had to extend through his son Jesus to us, to die for each and every one of us, for them that was there and us now, and every human being that would come. For us, we just have to die to ourselves just to extend grace to our neighbor. That's the only requirement that we have. And so what I like to do is I like to ask myself a question, and I like to flip it. I said, is the offense greater than the grace that's been given to me? And I'll honestly have to answer. I have to search my own heart and say, you know what? Yes. And it's in that moment to where I have to remind myself that, Shannon, grace is eternal. See, the offense is only temporary. See, when somebody offends you, it's not going to last forever. It's just in that moment. But the grace that's been extended to you and expected for you to extend to somebody else, guess what? That lasts forever. And so as I look at this, I'm like, you know what? Yeah, I get it. I get that they hurt me. I get that it's painful. But can I respond in a matter of grace that's greater than the pain that I feel? Can I respond in a matter of grace that's greater than the biggest offense that I've ever felt? In other words, grace goes beyond the offense on behalf of the kingdom. And so when I look at this, I say, do I have a grace mindset or do I have an offended mindset? And let's be honest, with everything that's going on in our world and our nation right now, we have a lot of reasons to where we could be offended. But the question is, what kind of mindset are we going to have? And we see that Jesus responds with two mindsets that we can see, or not two mindsets, but two examples of having a kingdom mindset, a mindset of grace. The first is that he physically yielded his body on our behalf. He completely gave up himself. And not just from a point of grace, but also from a point of humility. He did it in a way that he said, you know what, I could remove myself from this cross. But I'm going to humble myself under the authority of my Father. And I'm going to complete his work. Because Jesus could. He had the power, but he didn't. But not only this, the second way, and I love this, what we read in the verse, is he went to God on their behalf. See, sometimes we say we may be able to, we'll do this or we'll do that, but the question is, will you actually go to God on your accuser's behalf? Will you go to God for the person that offended you, that lied on you, that talked about you, that stole from you? Is the grace that God has given you greater than the offense in your eyes? See, Matthew 12, it talks about that out of the abundance of the heart, the mouth speaks. Is your response reflective of a heart that's appreciative of the grace that God has given you? Is the grace greater than the offense? And I'll be honest, it's a hard reality, because every time I scroll right now, every time I go through something right now, it's so easy for me to be offended. Somebody does something at work, it's so easy to be offended. But when I respond, is it of a kingdom mindset? Is it remembering the grace that God extended to me? But I want to continue on here for a second, because there was this moment in high school where I made mistakes. Like it was bad from the standpoint of I didn't do what I needed to do to get to college. And I didn't realize it until it came that time to start applying. And I started seeing all of my other friends' GPAs and their SAT scores. And I was like, Shannon, this is going to be a rough road. Because I did just enough to get by to be able to continue to play football. But I didn't do everything I needed to do to continue my education. And so what do? I did the only thing I knew to do at that point in time, what my mother taught me. I started fasting and praying. Like literally, y'all, I was worried. Like this is huge for a high school. I was like, all right, no meat. I'm in there. And so I didn't make it to college, but what it looked like is that I wasn't going to make it. But I was fasting and praying in hope that I would. But the two were constantly at war with each other. Let's go to Matthew chapter 28 and starting at verse 1. We're going to take a different perspective of what's going on in this moment. So this is after Jesus has been buried and he's in the tomb. And it says this: early on Sunday morning, as the new day was dawning, Mary Magdalene and the other Mary went out to visit the tomb. And I want to pause right there before we keep going. I want to look at what it looks like of Mary and the other Mary approaching the tomb. Can you imagine what they had to feel like in that moment? You're walking up on a dead situation that's supposed to be your promise. And I know some of us in life have walked up on a dead situation that God said, that's your promise. And you're like, God, I don't understand. How can something you promised me look like this? How can something you promised me feel like this? How can something you promised me give me so much anxiety in this moment? I can only imagine what they were feeling. The pain and the grief. But let's keep reading, because we all know the story gets better. It says in verse 2, it says, suddenly there was a great earthquake, For an angel of the Lord came down from heaven, rolled aside the stone, and sat on it, just comfortable. Can you imagine? He just sat on it like, I'm good because you're good because we good. Verse 3, his face shone like lightning, and his clothing was as white as snow. The guards shook with fear when they saw him, and they fell into a dead faint. Then the angel spoke to the woman. Don't be afraid, he said. I know you are looking for Jesus who was crucified. Guess what? He isn't here. He is risen from the dead, just as he said it would happen. Come see where his body was laying. I don't know about you, but we always have to pause and give a shout for the Jesus Christ that is risen on our behalf. But at the same time, they were walking up on a dead situation, something they thought was dead, only to find out that he's alive. This brings me to point 2. Grace is greater than what it looks like. Grace is greater than what it looks like. See, too often in life, we allow the moment or the situation to define our perspective of the kingdom of God, to define our perspective of grace. Because you got to think about it, before the earthquake, in that moment, it looked like Jesus has died. Matter of fact, he did. In that moment, he was buried. In that moment, the tomb was sealed. And so you got to think about it. So their view could have been in that moment, man, grace, it let me down. In that moment, they could have been like, grace appeared to have lost. Grace appeared to be a lie. It appeared to be defeated. But let me tell you this. We all know that when Jesus Christ died, that wasn't the end. When they buried him, that wasn't the end. When they sealed the tomb, that wasn't the end. Matter of fact, when the angel came down to talk to Mary Magdalene, that wasn't the end. He sat down because he knew it's not the end. And so what grace said, and think about what the angel said. The angel said, come and see. The beauty in that is it said, come and see, not what it looks like, because what they were expecting was to see Jesus in the tomb still dead. They say, don't come and see what it looks like, come and see what he promised. See, the thing about it is grace constantly wants you to see what God has promised you, not what it looks like. And so we have to wrap it in our minds. Sometimes we may get that bill in the mail that says, it has red writing all over it, and we know what that means. This is your last chance. And we're like, now what? Grace says, come and see. You may have gotten the doctor's report that may have something terminal on it or something you weren't expecting, or you weren't expecting it to look that way. And you're like, now what? Grace says, come and see. There may have been some consequences in your life from the decisions that you've made, or maybe the decisions of others have created consequences for you. And you're like, now what? What does grace do? Say, come and see. See, we have to understand that grace is constantly working on our behalf. I know what it looks like, but grace says, do you know what I've promised? Come and see. He said, I'll never leave you. I'll never forsake you. He says, though you may stumble, guess what? You won't fall, because I'm going to hold you with my right hand. That's what grace says, come and see. That he can do exceedingly and abundantly. That's what grace wants you to come and see. And so we can't allow what the moment looks like to get in the way of what grace has promised. Grace is always greater than what it looks like. But let's keep reading, because there's something, we have an additional responsibility with grace. So when we look at Matthew and keep going in verse 8, chapter 2, it says this, and now, this is the angel talking, go quickly and tell his disciples that he has risen from the dead. And he is going to ahead of you to Galilee. You will see him there. Remember what I have told you. See, we're not just supposed to see that grace is greater. We also have a responsibility to tell it. See, grace looked at the situation and it defied all the laws that man knew. It looked at man's plans and just laughed. It said, so you think I'm dead? No, not quite. The King of Kings was sent on our behalf. See, the work of the kingdom doesn't end because of the choices of men. See, Pharisees, they thought they had him. Caiaphas, who was the chief priest who actually wanted Jesus to be captured, and he went through all of this, and he was encouraging Pilate to actually let Barabbas go instead of Jesus, and all of this, he was egging everything on. He thought he had Jesus. See, Satan, he thought he had Jesus. Death thought it had Jesus. But neither can the moments of men or of fallen angels denounce the perfection of the plan that God has. It just can't be done. And so that's why we have to tell people about grace. So now what? We walk in peace because there's grace. Now what? We tell somebody else because of the grace we've experienced that they can experience it too. Now what? We believe that grace is greater than what it looks like. But let's go back up to verse 2. I'm not going to read it, but just remember, this is when Mary is on approach. Both Marys are on approach to the tomb. And they're walking towards the tomb. And so in this moment, Jesus was supposed to be in the tomb. And so some think that, maybe it was because Jesus didn't have the proper burial of the way they did it then, that they were going to address that. But let's think about it. These two women couldn't have rolled that stone away. They couldn't have done it themselves. I believe that maybe one of the reasons that they were there is because they just wanted to be in the presence of Jesus. I believe Mary knew that in all of this is what's going on. Even though my promise is supposed to be in that tomb dead, there's still peace and hope in the presence of Jesus. And so in that moment, when she finds out the tomb is empty, I think something hit her. She realized, oh my goodness, grace is alive. He's not there. Grace is working on our behalf. And so, like I said last week, it was at that moment to where grace, what it was brought to do was done, but it's still working. It's working on my behalf and it's working on your behalf. The key of it is we have to get into the presence of grace. Mary recognized something. I want to get there and I want to remain there. Why? Because it's in the presence of grace that the situation looks better than what my family currently looks like. It's in the presence of grace to where my community looks better than what it looks like. See, it's in the presence of grace with all the turmoil going around in our country right now. It's in his presence to where it looks better than what it actually looks like. See, it's in the presence of grace where you find peace for what's present. It's only in the presence of grace to where you can look at what's happening in life and you can say, you know what? I still have peace. It's going to be okay. Even though it doesn't always look good, grace is always there. And I know it's a hard reality to deal with. I couldn't imagine being in that moment before we find out Jesus gets up and having to experience that. But it's because he got up that we can now look at our situation and say, you know what? This can get up too. So I want to jump back to school. For when I was going into school, I was able to finish. I still had bad habits I had to get rid of and things I had to work through, but I was able to finish school and graduate. And it wasn't as much as me as it was the grace of God that allowed me to finish. It was by his grace that I could finish. And that brings me to my final point, 3. Grace will always finish what it started. Grace will always finish what it started. Right now, Jesus is sitting at the right hand of his Father. And he's getting ready to return. He's sitting up there, getting ready to come back and finish what he started. But here's the beauty of it. While we're here, he's also finishing what he started in you and what he started in me. And that's that gift of salvation. See, without Jesus, we have no access to the Father directly. We have no access to God. But when he rose and he went and sat at the right hand of his Father where he is sitting now, he is interceding on our behalf. That means he is praying for us. He is the grace for us that allows us to be even in the presence of God. And so when God looks upon us, he sees Jesus. He sees grace. And so what does that mean? God may be able to see what you have done, but he also sees what Jesus has done. And so now he's looking through the lens of his Son at you. And so when he sees your mistakes, he doesn't see your mistakes. He sees them through the lens of grace. When he sees the decisions that you made and where you've messed up, he's looking at it through the lens of grace. When you receive things and I receive things that we don't deserve, it's because he's looked at us through the lens of grace. But it's through this lens that it's not just the gift of salvation, but it's grace for your purpose, the thing he uniquely designed each and every one of you for. And so I want to finish with this scripture because I love it so much. Philippians 1:6. And this is where Paul is writing a letter to the church of Philippi. And he says this in it. He says, "And I am certain that God, who began the good work within you, will continue his work until it is finally finished on the day when Christ Jesus returns." Now look at this. The big gift, the thing that he's really finishing is the work of salvation when he returns. Like you're saved, but he's going to put the seal on it when he comes back and we all get to shout. And that would be enough, if I can be honest. But one thing that stands out in this verse to me is it says, he will continue his work until. It's not like he paused it and said, okay, I did grace on the cross, and then I'm going to finish it, pause, and I'm going to finish it here when I return. No, he's still working. He's still in the midst of working in you. He's still in the midst of working on you, working through you. There's so much that he's still doing through grace right now. And if we miss it and we think it's just this moment on the cross, in the moment when he returns, we miss all the work that he's doing, that his grace wants to complete in you. He didn't give you dreams and visions for no reason. It's a work that's in you that he wants to complete. He didn't give you desires to do things that you know that you can't handle on your own. It's because he wants to complete a work in you and help you to understand that it takes grace. And so I don't know what God has birthed in you. And maybe you don't know. If you don't, I encourage you to pray, God, why did you put me here? But the moment you find out, the moment that you know, it's in that moment that I want you to grasp onto the fact that grace is going to continue to work on you and see it complete in you. That's what grace wants to do. At the end of the day, the question is, now what? Now that you know that our response as believers should be so gracious, more gracious than the offense. Now that you know that no matter what it looks like, grace is greater than that. Now that you know that God has started something in you and he will finish it, now what? That's the question I want to leave you with. What are you going to do? What decisions are you going to make? What changes in your mindset do you need to make to really appreciate the grace that God has given you? I'll admit, there's been moments where I've taken it for granted. We talked about it last week, where I'll call him when I can't do it anymore myself, instead of calling him first. Now what? Like they say, the ball's in your court. This is your life and your decisions. Now what?